Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining the call today. With us on the line, we have the Obama campaign's chief counsel, Bob Bauer, who's going to discuss Federal Elections Commission complaint that's been filed today against the Clinton-affiliated group, the American Leadership Project. And joining Bob is State Representative Matt Pierce of Indiana. So with that, Bob, if you could take it away.
Certainly. This morning we filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission alleging that a 527 organization, American Leadership Project, was violating the law by failing to register with the Federal Election Commission as a political committee and by failing to comply with the requirements for functioning as a political committee, and particularly taking contributions in violation of the law well in excess of the limit and not meeting any of the federal law reporting requirements. Now, the background to this, as you know, is that for some years the Federal Election Commission has been wrestling with organizations styling themselves as 527s and evading the substantive requirements of campaign finance laws. Normal political committees are limited in what they can collect, and they have reporting requirements. Organizations like American Leadership Project is attempting to avoid political committee status so it can collect money from whatever source in whatever amount and not disclose to the public through the Federal Election Commission. In 2004, this particular mode of operation was made notorious by Swift Boat Veterans for Truth and other 527 organizations. And in the following years, the Federal Election Commission, under court supervision, began to develop and enforce legal standards that were intended to keep 527 organizations from operating in this fashion in violation of the law. Now, in December of 2006, the Federal Election Commission made it very clear what those standards were. Any organization, like American Leadership Project, which comes into existence for the sole purpose of supporting a federal candidate or opposing a federal candidate, and that spends more than $1,000 toward that activity, has to register as a political committee and has to comply with these substantive restrictions and reporting requirements. The Federal Election Commission posted a notice, which is to be found on its website, warning of serious legal consequences if organizations do what the American Leadership Project has done here. This is a significant issue because it has been expected and hoped that we would not see in 2008 what we saw in 2004, and the Federal Election Commission has committed itself to making sure that does not happen, and it has done so, as I mentioned, under close federal court supervision. So the action we're filing today, which regrettably involves members of our own party who have clearly declared their purpose here, a purpose of supporting one candidate and opposing another, is, I think, the first shot here in trying to make sure we don't see this year what we saw 4 years ago. This is the first shot, if you will, in the sequel to the Swift Boat Veteran saga. And it is a test of whether or not the law, which has been developed over the last couple of years and announced, has been enforced. I'll mention only that at the same time that the FEC posted its notice and made it very clear it intended to enforce this law seriously, it also settled with a number of organizations that did just what American Leadership Project is doing here and collected millions of dollars in penalties. And it meant by collecting these large penalties to send a message. And now the law needs to be enforced to send the ultimate message, and not just so that American Leadership Project is forced to comply with the law which it's currently violating, but so that as we head into the general election, it is very, very clear to other organizations that would do the same that it won't be tolerated. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kevin.
Thanks. Thank you, Bob. Representative Pierce?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I saw this ad on TV yesterday and a couple times, and it really caught my attention because it's kind of unusual to have an ad that kind of goes after a candidate and then ask you to call that candidate. And I've seen that happen with members of Congress or on a referendum or something where people are trying to influence actual legislation. But clearly this ad didn't make sense to me. And that's when it became clear to me that this was one of those 527s, because I kept asking myself, who's the ALP? Who are these people? And I really don't know. And because of that, I think this kind of 527 thing is really poisoning our campaigns, and it spills over into the whole tone in Washington. And that's the whole point of my support for the Obama campaign, So I think Senator Obama is trying to change that. And if we don't get these 527s out of this process, we're going to continue with the same old kind of a negative attack politics that poisons everything. And I'm trying to work and support candidates who are going to try to get us out of that same old cycle. One of the things that I've really noticed about this campaign is people are very excited about getting involved. They really feel empowered, and that their small acts, whether it's going door to door or giving $100, can really make things happen. And I don't have the financial ability to give $10,000, $100,000, $1 million to a 527. And I've been very excited that my $100 that I gave to Barack Obama seems to really be making a difference. And I think we lose that if we let these 527s run amok.
Thank you, Representative Pierce. We'll open it up for questions now.
Thank you. And if you would like to ask a question, please do so by pressing star followed by the digit 1 on your telephone. You will hear a voice prompt indicate when the line is open, and please state your name before posing your question. We will take our first question now. Again, as a reminder, that is star 1. And caller, your line is now open.
Hi, Peter Overby from NPR. What is an FEC complaint worth these days when there's no functioning FEC?
Well, two things to be said about that, Peter. The first is that the FEC has taken the position that it can begin to process the steps toward an investigation. And so it is an expectation on our part that they will do that. But if you examine the complaint, you'll also see that we're not only asking the FEC to act expeditiously, but if it concludes that it cannot, and I think that its position is that it can in fact initiate these proceedings, but if it concludes that it cannot, we have urged them to refer this matter to the Department of Justice, which, as you know, has concurrent jurisdiction over knowing and willful violations of the federal campaign finance laws. That's a matter of federal statutory law. The Department of Justice can step in if the FEC is unable to act. So the FEC essentially has a choice here. It can begin the investigative process. It's fully staffed and has the resources to do so. Or it can decide that it's unable to do so, in which case, in light of the urgency of this, it ought to refer the matter, as it has referred other matters, to DOJ.
Can it do that without a quorum?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and how far can it go with the investigation without a quorum?
Well, I'm going to leave the FEC to make the decision about how much of its investigative resource it ought to commit to this. I can only note that the FEC identified this as one of its highest enforcement priorities. It went to great lengths when it released the results of the enforcement actions against the 2004 527s to inform the regulated community that it intended to vigorously enforce this law and warned of serious consequences if the law was violated. And so I'm going to assume, I think this campaign will assume, I think anyone who cares about the law being enforced as the agency said it would be, would assume, that the FEC will take the full staffing that it currently has and allocate a generous share of it to preparing an investigation and pursuing it. This will put American Leadership Project on notice that the agency means what it says, and that counts for something. If they hear from this agency, they'll think twice about their conduct. I'll mention something we heard only in the last couple of hours, which is that, you know, they have special reporting responsibilities in connection with their advertising in Indiana, and as of this morning, it isn't clear it has complied with them. Now, we'll confirm that. Obviously, we'll take every precaution to make sure we're right about that, but I think it's important, and the FEC is fully able to do it even now, that this organization receive a message that it will be held accountable for compliance with the law. If the FEC concludes that somehow these efforts are going to fall short of its goal, the Department of Justice certainly is fully functioning and can take over.
Okay, thank you.
Before we take our next question, operator, would you mind, after we get a call, if you could just, after we ask an initial question, if we just mute the line so that we can get as many people that are able to ask questions as we can. Next question.
And we will go ahead and move on to our next question. Caller, please go ahead. The line is now open.
Hello, it's Adi Robal with the BBC here in Washington. Can you just go through some of the greatest hits, so to speak, of the American Leadership Project group in terms of what they have done in terms of negatively impacting your candidate? And also, is there any way for you guys to get this ad in Indiana pulled immediately?
Kevin, do you want to address the first part of the question?
Actually, can we get the question? Can we get that again? Because I did not hear the first part of it.
I apologize, caller. Will you please signal by pressing star 3?
Hello?
And please go ahead with that question again.
Great. Hi, it's Audio Revolve with the BBC. Just wanted to go over what would you regard as the greatest hit, so to speak, of this against your campaign? Would you are you accusing the Clinton campaign of carrying out negative attacks through this group? What kind of coordination do you think, if any, is going on between the campaign and this group? And finally, is there any way for you to get this ad pulled into Indiana immediately?
Okay, I'll take the first part of that. I mean, the Clinton campaign at this point now has a negative attack ads that both the campaign is running and that ALP is running. As far as the coordination, I don't know that we're discussing that, but I think obviously the ties between the Clinton campaign and ALP run pretty deep, including the guy who is the chair of ALP and the spokesman is the son of one of the Clinton campaign's Indiana co-chairs. So that's a pretty significant tie. And I'll let Bob answer the second part of that.
Yeah, and I'll add. I mean, there are connections all throughout this, and they're useful probably as a footnote to the point that the group itself isn't making any bones about its purpose here, which is one of the reasons why its legal position is hopelessly defective. I'll also say that the question of how coordinated or not coordinated the advertisement is the sort of thing that would be determined on investigation. On the question of stations, stations can turn down ads like this. They're not compelled to take them. That is a choice that each station makes in its own editorial judgment as a matter of federal communications law.
We will go ahead and move on to our next question. Caller, please go ahead. That line will now be opened.
Yeah, this is Sam Youngman from the Hill. I just wanted to ask, how concerned are y'all about the effectiveness in this group in Indiana?
Well, look, I think ultimately that the Hoosier voters are smarter than this. That they're going to recognize this as the sort of politics that is preventing progress in Washington, and that this state is going to reject this kind of politics, because it's the very thing that's prevented progress on really our most important issues. It's emblematic of one of the things that's wrong with Washington, and it's one of the things that Senator Obama obviously is running against and running to make a break from. We think that we trust the people of Indiana to see through this sort of thing, and ultimately we think there's going to be a blowback on the Clinton campaign for this.
Thank you. And taking our next question, please go ahead. That line has now been opened.
Hey, it's Ben Smith from Politico. Sorry about the background noise. We had a conference call like this a few months ago, and I'm wondering what ALP is now doing that's different from what it was doing before.
If you recall, when we had that last conference call, we strongly suggested, we communicated a warning, if you will, to ALP that there would be consequences. It was very quiet for a while. They seemed to be having difficulty raising money, or they weren't doing so very energetically. But then, of course, they hopped on to Pennsylvania, and now they've hopped on to Indiana, and it appears that this is becoming a pattern and that they have a commitment to this ongoing illegal 527 activity. And so as committed, we've taken this first step. And I think this will be one of a series of steps, and I can fairly well assure you that all of these steps will be brought to a conclusion. I mean, this is activity that is so flatly illegal that there will, in fact, be the reckoning I predicted in the call that you're referring to.
Okay, and we will take our next question. Please go ahead.
It's Sylvia Smith with the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette calling. aside from if what they're doing, if what they are is in fact a 527, then what they're doing falls within the law of that governs 527. So your argument hinges on whether they're a 527 or they're a PAC. Aside from news accounts that describe them as a pro-Clinton organization, what evidence do you have that shows that their purpose is to raise money to support Hillary Clinton?
There is nothing on the record that suggests any other purpose. How they raise their money, how they've organized themselves, how they structured their ads, how their website is presented. There is literally not one piece of evidence in the mix that suggests any other purpose. There's only one purpose on display here. If somebody's planning to mount a legal defense on behalf of this organization, it will have to be the most extraordinarily creative legal defense known to the profession in decades. In my judgment, this organization has made the decision that it will run this risk and try to run out the clock, that it will exact every last benefit from the illegal activity and hope to have spent down to zero before the law knocks on its door. Because I cannot see anything, and I've been practicing in this field for 30 years. I don't think anybody spent more time on these issues than I have. I cannot see a glimmer of a defense, and I'm not sure that this organization is relying on anything other than time to save itself here, and not to save itself so much, but to give it the advantage of spending without having to shut down before the last penny is spent.
Do you have any documentation that as part of their fundraising efforts or anything on their website that expressly advocates for Clinton?
But they are absolutely at the moment leaving a documentary trail, a trail that you can construct from everything that they've done, that they came into existence for one purpose. And by the way, the fact that they've acknowledged this purpose in discussions with reporters is not immaterial. And that is the purpose of intervening in this primary campaign on behalf of one candidate, Hillary Clinton, and against another candidate, Barack Obama. Now, that, by the way, is not illegal per se, if, and I stress if, they complied with federal campaign finance laws and organized an independent committee that would be required to operate within the same limits that all other political committees must comply with under the federal campaign finance laws. What they decided to do over a period, as they've told the press on background, that Hillary Clinton was having difficulty raising money, was to reach beyond the federal campaign finance limits, raise money in unlimited amounts from any source that it could get its hands on, and also not meet any of the other reporting requirements of federal law for regular political committee reporting. So if you look at it, primary to primary, for one candidate against another, soliciting money from people for the express purpose of keeping those types of communications on the air, communications with press about their purpose, references to her fundraising difficulties, it's just impossible for me to imagine what their legal defense would be under the standards that the SEC announced at the end of 2006, and on the basis of which it imposed fines of millions of dollars on a collection of other organizations operating in just the same way.
Thank you. And again, we'll move on. Please go ahead.
Hey, Bob, this is Mary Jacoby. Is there anything different from the FEC complaint that another supporter of Senator Obama's filed in February?
I'm not aware. To be honest with you, that was not a complaint that the campaign was involved with. That was an action taken by someone who supports Senator Obama, who is extremely frustrated with what she saw about ALP's activities. Since that time, we've been able, obviously, to develop a record, devote our own thought and analysis to it. And so the complaint that we filed today is our complaint, and it reflects our most thorough fact-gathering and our most thorough legal analysis. And, of course, it has the full backing of the campaign and will be pursued. So in that sense, it's different.
Thank you, and we'll move on again. Please go ahead, caller. The line is now open.
Hi, it's Jim Coonan at AP. Is there any conflict between you cited the FEC fines issued in 06 for all these various 527s? is there any conflict between those fines and the regulation that the FEC promulgated after Washington Right to Light that included examples of the types of issue ads that would be permissible, and how does that apply in this particular case?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's the source of a great deal of confusion out there, and I think it's confusion that this particular 527 and perhaps others that we're going to see in the fall is going to be trying to take advantage of. The WRTL case that you referred to, a Supreme Court case, goes to the question of what organizations set up for a whole host of purposes are permitted to do when they speak out on issues in an election year. That is not a case that applies to 527 activity, which is about organizations like this that are set up for the exclusive purpose of intervening in an election on behalf of one candidate or against another, or both. So if, for example, a union or a nonprofit organization dedicated to international hunger relief efforts wishes to speak out in an election year and urge legislators, some of whom are running for election, to take a particular position, the court has carved out generous constitutional space for them because they are speaking out on issues, but their purpose, their major purpose, is not to influence elections, even though their speech at the time will be on a political election-related topic. In this case, the 527 case, you are dealing with organizations that are set up as political committees under 527 of the Internal Revenue Code, and their major purpose is precisely to influence federal elections. And here, we have that with ALP, and the law requires organizations set up with that major purpose, if they spend as little as $1,000 in a calendar year, to comply with substantive restrictions on how much they raise and spend, and they comply with reporting requirements. So the Supreme Court's decision in that Wisconsin case has no bearing here. What has a bearing here are the actions that the FEC took under the close supervision of the Federal District Court to address swift boat activities. And make no mistake, that's what we're talking about. This organization, ALP, is a swift boat wannabe. That's what it is. And it's violating the law in exactly the same way, and it will face a similar legal outcome with this one difference. Swift Boat could argue it wasn't sure what the standards were. We don't have to take that necessarily seriously, but that's what it argued, that it thought it was complying with the law. There is no chance that ALP can credibly argue after December 2006 that it didn't know it was violating the law.
And again, as a reminder for questions, that's star one. We will take our next one. Please go ahead.
Justin Metzger from WBIW News in Bedford, Indiana. And be as detailed as you can, but what specific evidence have you presented to the FEC in your complaint, and should they not respond in the way that you're hoping they will, what's your next step?
Well, as to the first, we've gone through everything this organization has done to date, every trace that it's left of its purposes, what it's communicated to the press, what its lawyers have said on its behalf, what its website has disclosed of its purposes, what appears in its advertisements, the other political commitments of its backers. We've taken all of that information, and in a detailed complaint, which is available to you, which is 10 pages of analysis and then a number of other pages of exhibits attached for the FEC's review, we've laid that case out. And as I said earlier, it couldn't be clearer. It's as easy a case as anybody could make of a violation of the federal campaign finance laws. Now, as we mentioned to you earlier, the FEC has a choice to make here. Even though it is short of commissioners, it's still a fully functioning agency for other purposes, for a number of purposes. It opens in the morning, it closes in the evening, the staff reports to work, the investigators continue to be paid, the lawyers continue to operate as they do on a day-to-day basis, and they answer to those commissioners still in office. And they will reply, as a matter of fact, in court filings. They reply as an agency in a variety of contexts. So they have a choice to make here, which is the choice of doing what they said they would do, which is to take this sort of action seriously, which would mean immediately contacting ALP and initiating an investigation, immediately contacting the donors and the principals and bringing them into the investigation, and sending a message that way, which might, by the way, be quite effective in and of itself. Or it can conclude, for whatever reason, and we don't expect it, but it could, that it's not in a position to pursue this, And if that's the case, it has the absolute authority, which it has exercised in the past, of referring the matter to the Department of Justice to pursue in the FEC's place. The Department of Justice has concurrent jurisdiction. It can act on referral to the FEC or on its own initiative to penalize knowing and willful misconduct. Not garden variety mistake, but knowing and willful misconduct. If someone deliberately violates the federal campaign finance laws, they can answer to the Federal Election Commission, which has the authority to impose very, very stiff penalties for knowing and willful violations, or it can answer to the Department of Justice. The FEC has an institutional responsibility, having set the enforcement priority that it did here, of either pursuing this case now with the resources available to it, or notifying the Department of Justice that it's not in the position to do so, and having the department do so. The department is in a position of conducting a wide-ranging investigation as effectively, and certainly with greater resources, than the FEC does. But the FEC should make that choice in the first instance. That's how the law, I think, in the normal course would work. But if this is a normal situation, it doesn't have to work that way.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Representative Pierce. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Bye-bye.